For the lead up to Deadpool and Wolverine, I decided to watch all of the Fox X-Men films, most of them for the first time. I was too young for the original trilogy when it first came out, so I didn't really have an interest in the rest. My introduction to Marvel was the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy and the MCU, so X-Men was always the other Marvel franchise for me. And here's another bombshell, I also never really had that much of connection to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. So when it was announced that he'd be returning, I wasn't as hyped as everyone else. But I decided that with Deadpool and Wolverine serving as closure to this universe, I decided now would be a perfect time to catch up. There is an exception though. I decided to skip the New Mutants because I felt like that one didn't really connect to any of the others, and honestly, I just really had no interest in it. Now, 12 movies later, here's my thoughts on the X-Men franchise. The first film in the franchise, and honestly not the greatest start. Maybe it just hasn't aged well, but I wasn't a huge fan. A common criticism of this movie is that it's embarrassed to be a superhero movie, and I think that's very true. There's multiple lines where they make fun of the source material, just in case you thought this was a movie for dumb babies and not badasses.
You actually go outside in these things?
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
To be fair though, this was still in the phase where superhero movies were trying to recover from the reception of the Joel Schumacher Batman films. This was also at a time when teen movies weren't really a thing. The movie really struggles juggling all these characters. Wolverine, Rogue, Professor X, and Magneto all get pretty good development, but everyone else is pretty flat. Cyclops gets it the worst in the whole trilogy, as he's pretty much only here to get cucked by Logan. I don't even think Sabretooth and Toad get any lines of dialogue. The story in general just feels too generic, but then again I guess that's not too fair since this movie was influential for every comic book film that came after it. On the positive side, this movie did sell me on Hugh Jackman as Wolverine pretty immediately. You can tell he's really giving it his all. Also, everyone knows how iconic Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are as Charles and Magneto, but beyond its performances, the original X-Men is pretty average. This movie is definitely an improvement over the last one. The team is a lot better balanced in this one, although Cyclops still sucks. I love the additions of Nightcrawler and Pyro, and Iceman and Storm get some much needed screen time that flushes them out a little bit more. I especially like the friendship with Storm and Nightcrawler. I think they have good chemistry together. I think the villain is an improvement too. It's not to say I dislike Magneto, but I think Stryker is actually more interesting because he has no powers and represents what the whole theme of X-Men is. Fighting against hate and prejudice. Set pieces are great too, specifically the opening scene and the attack on the X-Mansion with Wolverine just going nuts. Magneto's escape scene is pretty cool too. While it's definitely the best of the OG trilogy, I don't know if I'd say it's the best of the franchise. I still think Jean Grey as a character is pretty underdeveloped, so I don't really feel anything when she sacrifices herself or in any of her scenes with Logan. She has no character and they have no chemistry, so it's just not fun to watch in the end. Lady Deathstrike is also pretty bland, she's just around so Wolverine can have someone to fight at the end. Overall though, this one's pretty good. A very solid improvement over the original. This movie can be summed up in 2 words. Wasted potential. They had a lot going for them. A well-received part 2 that built up hype, adapting one of the most famous X-Men storylines in the Dark Phoenix, and finally introducing classic X-Men like Kitty Pryde and Angel, and it's all squandered. Angel, Kitty, and Rogue all get pushed to the side just because we have to deal with too many damn characters at once. Don't even get me started on Colossus, who barely counts as a character. He might as well have just been a background prop. Jean, who's built up to be the main villain, is almost immediately pushed to the side so she can be another henchman for Magneto, and that's after killing Cyclops off screen in the final moment of pissing all over him that this trilogy does. It suffers from the classic problem with third entries in superhero franchises, trying to shove as much shit in as possible. At least Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are still doing their thing. I kinda think this movie is actually a little overhated. Not saying it's good, but I mean, it's not boring, and there's some genuinely good ideas buried under all this mess. If they would have simplified the story and given the characters more time to breathe, this could have been another classic. Another hot take here, this movie is actually okay. Probably because I haven't read the X-Men comics yet, although I am planning on it now, but I didn't think this movie was the atrocity everyone says it was. Don't get me wrong, it's still a bad movie, but there are worse superhero movies. I think the first hour is genuinely good setup, and there's decent action throughout. Everyone who's seen this already knows the best scene of the first one. You can tell this is when Hugh Jackman had really become one with Wolverine. I think this is maybe the best performance he had given so far as the character. Liev Schreiber's Sabretooth is also very good, and I like the rivalry between him and Logan. The bad stuff is pretty bad though. Will.i.am should not be acting ever. There's also the pointless inclusions of Cyclops and Gambit, who aren't here for any reason but fan service and to set up future movies that never happened. Finally, there's Deadpool. I won't belabor the point because everyone already knows how badly they fucked him up, but I mean his nickname is literally the Merc with a mouth, and they take away his mouth. How do you come up with that idea and think that it makes sense? Anyways, yeah, this is probably a bad movie, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine. I'd rather watch an entertaining train wreck like this than a competent, mediocre movie, like the original X-Men. This was the first X-Men movie I ever saw, and one of the only two I saw in theaters. I haven't seen it since I was 8, so I was curious how I'd feel about it now, and I gotta say, it holds up. This one felt the most comic booky. The MCU had been going for a couple years already, and I think it influenced this film. There's much more embracing of the source material. The casting of James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender is genius, and I would have no complaints if they returned as the MCU's versions of Professor X and Magneto. They have a really genuine friendship, and Magneto especially is such an interesting, complex character. Jennifer Lawrence and Nicholas Hoult are great too. This is a team movie done right, as pretty much everyone in the baby X-Men gets something to do. Also, the ending on the beach is up there as one of the best climaxes in the whole series. I do have some issues, however. The Hellfire Club are pretty lame as villains. Only Kevin Bacon and Emma Frost really get to speak, even then they aren't saying anything very interesting. Just more of the same, we mutants must band together to kill humans stuff Magneto was already saying for 3 movies. Darwin's also wasted, which is a shame because I think he had the coolest powers. Also, this is more of a personal thing and it doesn't really fit into the timeline, but I think this would have been a good point to build up Cyclops and Storm more, since they didn't get too much exploration in the OG trilogy. I like the team we have, but you could have swapped out Alex for Scott and added in Storm. Still, this is up there as one of my favorite X-Men movies, finally rising above pretty good in my opinion. And we immediately go back to mediocre. This one I have probably the least to say about just because I really forgot most of it right after it ended. Hugh Jackman's still good as Wolverine, he's just not in a very interesting story. The first 30 minutes are great, with Logan surviving the atomic bomb and being a crazy woods hobo, but as soon as we go to Japan, it's just him missing Jean Grey, who is a bland character, and interacting with even more bland characters. There's some good action scenes like on the train, but it's hard to be invested in them when the surrounding story is just boring. Also, once again, this series really struggles with villains who aren't Magneto. For most of the movie, it's just generic Yakuza and Snake Lady, and then in the last 15 minutes he fights the giant Silver Samurai. Honestly, this is probably the only one I never rewatch, and that includes Last Stand and X-Men Origins. Like I said earlier, I'll take entertaining garbage over boring mediocrity every day of the week. This one is maybe the best pure X-Men movie. It does a nice job blending the two timelines together and serves as a good send-off to the older versions of the X-Men. I'm a big fan of post-apocalyptic superhero stories and time travel movies, so this is right up my alley. I honestly think this does Endgame's plot better than Endgame did. I know they aren't the exact same, but I think they're similar enough that the comparison is fair. Once again, I think Michael Fassbender steals the show as Magneto, and to me, I think he surpasses Ian McKellen in this one. That may be blasphemy, but I just find him more intimidating and more sympathetic. Also, I don't think I need to tell you how awesome the Quicksilver scene is. It's the greatest display of super speed in any movie, and I wish he stuck around in the movie longer, though I understand it's kind of hard to ride around a speedster, which is probably why the MCU killed off their version almost immediately. My only criticism is I feel like this could have used some more time to breathe. I didn't watch the row cut, which apparently gives more time to the future characters, which I would love to see. Other than that, this is just a really good superhero movie and a top tier X-Men film. When I was 13, I loved this movie, so I watched it over and over. Now, as a 20-year-old, I think it's not that great. Maybe that comes from me watching it too many times, so none of the jokes hit the same anymore. But for a comedy, a lot of the gags just fall flat. It honestly gets annoying at some points, to the point that I start to hate Deadpool himself, although his sidekick, TJ Miller, is even worse. Also, the movie tries to act like it's smarter than it is by calling out cliches in superhero movies, but it doesn't offer anything new instead, so it just becomes another generic superhero plot. It's not all bad though. I'm not the biggest Ryan Reynolds fan, but I will say he does embody this character, and you can tell that he loves being Deadpool. I really don't think anyone will be able to replace him, much like RDJ as Iron Man. The action is also surprisingly the best part. I think the car fight is one of the series' best scenes. Finally, this movie does a good job of redeeming Deadpool after that last attempt. This is what we should have gotten the first time. So, kind of disappointing rewatch, but it's still fun in places. Well, now they just full on suck. Apocalypse is a real slog to get through. A movie that's just over 2 hours feels like 3, with only brief moments of entertainment here and there. Pretty much all of the characters have lost their charm. I find it weird that Mystique basically became the main character of the reboot series because she's not very interesting and worked a lot better as Magneto's sidekick in the older films. I know it's because Jennifer Lawrence was the biggest star here, but she seems like she'd rather be anywhere else. Quicksilver and Nightcrawler get some good moments, but the movie is juggling so much that these get buried. Unlike The Last Stand, which had a similar problem, we don't have a Hugh Jackman to carry it. They tried to reintroduce Cyclops and Jean again, but didn't let them be anything but teens trying to figure themselves out. And again, we get some shitty villains. Apocalypse looks and sounds stupid. It's a real waste of Oscar Isaac. His powers also aren't very clearly defined, so it's difficult to understand what exactly he's capable of, or why he's supposed to be intimidating. Storm, Angel, and Psylocke are here to fill the roles of the side villains who barely get any dialogue. Then we have Magneto. I said earlier that I love Michael Fassbender in the role, but does he have to be in every single movie? Why not just put all the focus on Apocalypse? And he has the same problem as Jean in The Last Stand, where he just becomes a lackey for the main villain until the last 5 minutes. Beyond that, there's also some very bad lines that not even James McAvoy can sell.
Welcome to my world. You're at my house now.
The end battle, which feels like it lasts for hours, is also very ugly. Maybe they blew their effects budget in the Quicksilver scene, but everything in Cairo just looks so unpolished. This movie might be the ultimate waste of potential, something that's pretty common in this franchise. They had a great place to build off of after First Class and Days of Future Past, and they churned out this. I really don't have too much to say because everyone already knows how good Logan is. It's one of the greatest comic book movies ever. It does a good job of telling a gritty character study while also never forgetting that these are still superheroes at the end of the day. It has the best action scenes in the franchise since the R rating allows them to not hold back and let Wolverine be as violent as he needs to be. Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman are at their best here. You can tell they have a lot of love for these characters and want to give them a proper send-off. I love both of their interactions with Laura. All three of them have great chemistry and Daphne Keane does a great job, considering she would have been like 12 and this was her film debut. This is just the perfect send-off for Jackman's Wolverine. Even if I didn't really grow up with a strong connection to him, you can't argue that he isn't up there as being synonymous with their character and absolutely iconic, just like Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool and RJ as Iron Man. It's fantastic on the technical side too. The cinematography and set design really make this feel gritty, dirty, and bleak. If I did have one nitpick, it would have to be the villains, again, being pretty lame and generic, but I don't think it matters too much here because this movie is less about the conflict between good guys and bad guys and more about Logan struggling with finding purpose at the end of his life. All that really needs to be said though is that this is the best X-Men movie by far. It's really not close. This is the only one of these I've seen in theaters besides First Class, and I remember having a good time, but I figured since the first Deadpool didn't age too well, this one would be about the same. That wasn't the case, however. I think the jokes and action are both improved in this one by a lot. Deadpool gets a much better arc in this one, which gives him more of a character beyond meta jokes and thus makes him far less annoying. Side characters are also a lot better. We get less TJ Miller and the additions of Domino and Cable really work. Deadpool needs a straight man to bounce off of, and Josh Brolin is perfect in that role. Even Dopinder gets more screen time and some pretty funny lines. Not everything lands, of course, and Deadpool's death at the end really grated on me. Overall though, this was much more fun than the first one to me. Also, shout out to Celine Dion for giving it her all, even for a silly superhero movie.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, this one straight up stinks. It took me about 3 days to watch all of it because it was so incredibly boring. Jean is our main character, yet she has pretty much no personality in the last one, and she doesn't even have much of one here besides just being evil. Everyone else in the movie besides Charles, Magneto, and Beast are pretty flat. Quicksilver, who's the most fun character of the new X-Men, is sidelined because his powers are too broken, but you can count Storm's lines across the past 2 movies on 2 hands. I thought she'd be given more to do after being introduced as a villain in the last one, but I think she's in this one less. All the actors are trying, but they're given the worst material. Scenes drag on, and I especially hate the trope of a character almost explaining something, but then just staying vague. We also have another great actor in Jessica Chastain playing a shitty, underdeveloped villain, maybe the worst villain in a superhero film ever. Then there's just minor things like bad effects and getting rid of the cool suits from the end of the last movie for these very bland uniforms. The only positive thing I could say for this movie is that it at least tries to differentiate itself by introducing horror-ish elements like the dark lighting and ominous tone, but overall it just goes nowhere and we just get a generic superhero fight again. This is just a sad way for the franchise to go out. So I wrote this literally an hour after watching Deadpool and Wolverine, and I have to say, it was good. It wasn't the best Marvel movie ever, but it was a fun time. I think most of the jokes landed, and the action in this movie has been consistently great. Also, while I do think Logan was probably the best place his story should have ended, it was fun to see Hugh Jackman back, and him and Ryan Reynolds had really good chemistry together. And everyone knew going into this movie it was going to be a cameo fest, but I honestly thought they were pretty restrained with how many they had, and the ones they did include worked within the story and weren't super distracting. All that said though, I don't see anything sticking with me too much. Its only purpose is to provide some solid entertainment for 2 hours, and that's probably what the MCU has needed as of late. But there's not a whole lot more to it. When you think of the great superhero movies, like Logan, or Spider-Verse, or The Dark Knight, they go beyond the blockbuster thrills and provide stories, performances, and visuals that stand out. Deadpool and Wolverine is pretty bland when it comes to its visuals and story. This is also not really the movie's fault, but really a problem with current superhero films as a whole. But the multiverse is tired. Sometimes it works, but usually it's just to get some claps and cheers from the opening weekend audience. Seems like with Secret Wars in 2027, we're going to be moving past this and it can't come quick enough. Might sound like I'm hating on this movie, but I really did have a good time watching it. I would absolutely recommend it if you're a Marvel fan. I just personally couldn't escape the feeling that I want a little bit more out of these movies, and this one left me feeling a little bit hollow. So that was my review of the Fox X-Men franchise. These movies are very mixed bag. Some are very good, a lot are average, and a few are straight garbage. I think the main problems with the series are, 1, never finding a way to balance all the different X-Men. Pretty much every one of the films focuses on either Wolverine or Professor X and Magneto. Everyone else is a bit underdeveloped, and we never get the chance to grow a strong attachment to any of them. And problem number 2, never figuring out the villains besides Magneto. With the exception of Stryker and X2, every villain besides Magneto sucks. They're usually either generic and boring, or they end up just becoming background villains compared to Magneto. I get that he's the X-Men's archenemy, but I think his presence could have been toned down in a lot of these and would have been to the movie's benefit. Overall though, the good movies are really good, some better than most other comic book films. We also get some really iconic performances, some of them of the same character. I also think these movies deserve to be remembered as what really brought Marvel into the mainstream. Before the original X-Men, the only popular Marvel film was Blade, but that was really its own thing. These, along with the Raimi trilogy, were the guinea pigs of Marvel's attempt at creating franchises and ultimately led to the MCU. I don't regret watching them, and I'll definitely do another marathon sometime in the future, although there will be some that I skip. If y'all like this video, please make sure you subscribe and stick around because I'm going to have more coming soon. I had a lot of fun making this and I want to make some more. Anyways, if you want to keep up to date on new videos and developments, make sure you follow the Dim Lights Instagram right here. And if you want to keep up with me and my movie going habits, follow me on Letterboxd. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.